Well, welcome everyone to another episode of the Rod and Staff podcast. I'm Rod Saunders from Jew and Greek. And joining me today from Atlanta, Georgia is Rex Rouis. Say hi, Rex.
Hello, everybody.
Now, if you've never heard of Rex, you've probably visited his website once or twice, not even knowing who was behind it. It's called HopeFaithPrayercom. And he's got articles and stories about some of the great heroes of the faith, both modern and back from the 19th century, maybe even earlier than that. So I just wanted to invite him here today to tell us a little bit about his website and about his experience in the faith movement. And this guy has been in it a long time. So we talked yesterday, and it's amazing some of the stories he has. So Rex, if you would, just introduce yourself and give a little of your background and your testimony, if you could.
Hey, everybody. Love you all. I grew up in California in the 60s and all that goes with the 60s, in San Francisco. They say if you can remember the 60s, man, you weren't there.
Right.
And got saved in college and then went to Tulsa and joined a church there. And I walked in the room and I just knew I was home. It was God. I had just gotten saved in college, but I didn't know anything. Campus Crusade. I prayed with a guy. I know I got saved, but I didn't have any knowledge. And then walked into a church, and it was like one of the early Spirit-filled churches. And it was like, oh my God, I never knew anything about this, but I knew in my heart that it was home, and just got ravenous for God and His Word and faith. Faith has always been a hunger. Things about faith, everything about faith. How does faith work? I don't want platitudes. I wanted to know how it works, and started reading everything. And of course, Tulsa's there with Raymond and Kenneth Hagin Sr. at the time was very prominent. And church I went through, Buddy Harrison, his son, was son-in-law. Pat, the wife, pastor's wife, was daughter, and I led prayer there for 7 years. Was there for 10 years, and then went on to another church and with Billy Joe Doherty, and been studying it, hungry about it all the time. 2005, God comes into my room at a men's retreat and tells me to teach and write on faith and some other nice things that I don't want to go into, but I couldn't write my way out of a paper bag then. I'm an architect. I just couldn't write. So I really worked hard at writing, studying and grammar. There's a lot of grammar in writing, and really worked at it. I think I found my stride. And by 2008, just as a matter of putting all the content together in a cohesive place instead of piles of paper, I found out about this system called WordPress, on the content management system for blogs and Word. So lunged onto that just to put everything online and start writing articles. And in 2008, fall of 8, and that has grown. Didn't know it was going to grow until I had 27 million visitors on it. And about a third of it, excuse me, is my writing. Everything else is everything I could find. Obscure things, prominent things, out of copyright things. I have old books from Google when they were scanning stuff from the turn of the century, the turn of the century, 300 books, 600 some articles, all pretty much on faith. I don't get into anything else. In no end times, really, very little, no politics, nothing, just faith, how it works. And God really gave me the byline, the mechanics of faith. That's what interests me. How does it work? And when He told me about faith, it really kind of freaked me out a little bit, because faith, to me, is the biggest topic in the Bible.
Right.
Can you give me something more boutique? Everybody's teaching on faith, and I got loads of books, and I found out that I don't know how this sounds. Most of them didn't satisfy me. They were mostly hope. They were mostly encouragement. They're mostly you know, inspirational about faith, but there wasn't a lot of content.
Mm-hmm.
The only person I found that really had some content was Kenneth Hagin Sr. And I was in Tulsa. Early on, I worked at Rhema, their Bible college. My wife went to school there, but I worked there for a while in construction. Know him a little teeny bit, nothing personal, but I know everybody pretty much around that in that circle, and I love it. I still devour it. I think about it every morning. I get up and study it every morning. Spend time with God. He's my best friend.
Wow.
And it's just the most wonderful thing in the world.
Now, when you started your site, what year was it when you started that site?
Fall of 08, 2008.
08. So that's 12 years almost. What was the reaction at first? What was the traffic like? Was it pretty small at first?
The first year I got 300 people. There were 300 visitors.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't bother me. I probably wasn't worth much. No, I did some pretty good articles there. My writing skills, I was working on them night and day.
Mm-hmm.
And it grew over the years up to around 18. I gotta be frank with you, I got a little burned out in 2018. Google changed their algorithm. I was getting like 15,000 visitors a day. I had 380,000 my biggest month. You know, it was about 20-some million visitors, 25 million visitors overall. You know, some were just glancing blows. Some were reading. I got 10,000 or so comments. And I tell you, when you do everything yourself, SEO, email, site design, security.
I know all about that. I'm a one-man operation.
One man. Then you're dealing with the emails of people out there that's lives are just it's a load, and then you're coming up with good content once or twice a week. It's I got burned out, and I'm kind of going back now. Took a breather, but those 10 years, 20-some million visitors have come through. Tons of comments. I hit, and I'll finish up with this as a description. I always realized the importance of faith. What I did not realize was the importance of hope. And, you know, intellectually we know hope is important. It's in the Bible, blah, blah, blah. But if you lose hope, you lose the motivation and the strength and the stick-to-itness to get it to faith. It's what keeps you up and going. You know, Martin Luther said every tree was planted in hope, and I realized people were losing hope, and we started doing some pages on suicide and hopelessness and depression. And I believe depression is the emotional feeling of hopelessness, and it just blew up.
Wow.
For a while, you know, in Google for the SEO, you know, if you're searching, everyone wants to be on that top 10, the first page, right?
Right.
For a while, I had the top 3 spots on Google. If you put in anything concerning depression or suicide, the Bible, spiritual, anything like that, I had 1 or 2 at the top. Once in a blue moon, I had 3 at the top. I didn't pay for those spots. They were just organic SEO.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, SEO stands for search engine optimization. It's how you get your site to come up high in the search engine ranking.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I never did anything. It's just that it was dense with the right words, and I just wrote, and it was all, and it was huge. I had people that were getting ready to commit suicide and got on the site. You know, what does the person have? The last thing that they have, they've got their phone, you know? You're in the bathroom, maybe sitting on the can, and they're getting ready to go and do something nasty, and they'll do one more search. And I've had more than one person say that last search was the good one.
Wow.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I can understand that, when people's lives are spared as a result of the work that you've done, I can understand that would be an emotional thing.
And it's hope. I never realized the magnitude. Hope is huge. And
well, faith is the substance of things hoped for. So if you don't have any hope, then you have nothing to have faith for.
Exactly.
Right.
Faith builds the house, but hope's the materials. And I love that verse. It gives all the 3 tenses of faith right there. Faith is present tense, hope is past tense, and the evidence of things not yet seen is future. What an incredible verse that is.
Yeah.
Hebrews 11.
Now, I found your site when I was doing research for my blog and my videos on Word of Faith apologetics. And I found an article by Derek Vreeland. I think it was called Deconstructing the Word of Faith or something like that. And he wasn't necessarily a Word of Faith proponent. He was just trying to do a fair assessment of Word of Faith theology and countered some of the things that the critics said, but he also offered some of his own criticisms of the movement where it went into extremism and so forth. I thought it was a really good article.
Oh, yeah. I'm really not trying to push a point of view. I'm trying to figure this out. Okay. And I love talking with people, and I might not agree with him on everything, but that's okay. I don't agree with myself on everything.
Right.
And I've grown and seen different things. So I love talking with people that might not agree, because I'm really trying to figure this thing out. I think a lot of us have pieces of pieces of that elephant, that old metaphor. And yeah, great article. I have a lot like that.
Yeah, I think one of the guys that I've interviewed on my podcast, Troy Edwards, has had an article or two published on your site.
Yes, I believe it's Have the God Kind of Faith.
Okay. Yeah. So then that was one of the ways that I became familiar with Troy's work as well. But how many articles do you think that you've published over the years?
Oh, I know it's there's 675 articles, I believe. Some really long, some shorter. About half of those now, maybe 40% are mine. But I have articles by a lot of the big guys, A.B. Simpson and Charles Price from the old days. I have their books. A lot of articles by Kenneth E. Hagin, Lester Summerall. Was it John Reuven, who was regent of or head of was it Regent Seminary? He gave me all his books to put online. Wonderful man. Just a ton. Some of them are old, very old. Wesley, breast cancer healing under Wesley article that he wrote about. I mean, all kinds of things. And anything that sparks my fancy about faith,
Sounds like about one article a week. Is something like, I don't know how many weeks in 12 years, but I'm just kind of guesstimating. You try to do one a week. Yeah,
and some of the old books I would process, and they'd be put them in a nice PDF format so they can be downloaded. I've got I think it's 280 books on the free books page you can download. All kinds of books, all out of copyright, like J. Vernon McGee, Through the Bible with J. Vernon McGee.
Right.
I have all his books. He never put a copyright on any of his books.
Really?
So they're all on there. A.A. Allen's book, Amy Simple McPherson's, This Is That, huge tune. I think I have Gordon Lindsay's book on John Alexander Dowie, The Big Thing. All kinds. Wish I had scanned the list before the interview here, and I could have rattled off a lot more.
Well, I'll get the link to it, and I'll put the link in the description to your free book page, or if you've got a list like that on your site.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Yeah, we'll do that. So let's go back and talk a little bit about your experience around the early days of the Word of Faith movement, because you were there before I was. I came into the movement around 81, and you were there in the 70s, right?
Yeah, a few years before. I'm 77, 78 is when I hooked up, probably the latter end of 77. So just a little bit before you.
Right. And back then, because I moved to Tulsa in 1982 to go to Rhema, and it was amazing back then. There were so many churches where the gifts of the Spirit were in operation, where people were teaching faith. The worship was incredible, because it wasn't like today where so many of the services have 4 songs and then you're done, and then you start the satellite feed to your different campuses, and everything is just really formatted for time. Back then, there was nothing like that. The worship would go on sometimes for an hour or more, and then the Spirit started moving. They would go that direction. If not, then somebody would get up and teach the message that they'd prepared. But it was just an amazing time. And it's when you see the charismatic world today and compare it to back then, it's so drastically different. So I'm sure you've got some stories, because you said you attended FCF, Faith Christian Fellowship.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, what were you doing there?
Pardon?
What was your role there at FCF?
Well, my role initially was a fresh young kid out of the bars, but I walked into the church. I was trained as an architect, and was starting work at this firm the same day as this other kid that came in to go to school at Rhema. So we were in our kind of introductory thing again, and it was his mission to get me in church, apparently. And so he would beat on me at work all the time. And finally, he said, "Hey, why don't you go to church?" I said, "Okay, here's the deal, man. You go to bar with me, I'll go to church with you." So he went. He dutifully came and sat there for a few minutes at the bar, and I went to church. And as soon as I walked in, part of me wanted to leave, and part of me knew I was home, as I mentioned. But I stayed, and I found out that I had gotten saved in college. I didn't even understand the concept, but I got saved in college because then I could realize what was going on. And the moment that I got saved, how what I felt like. And then I got filled with the Holy Spirit, and I was a single guy, and I was praying in tongues maybe 1 or 2 hours a day. I was reading a Hagin book every weekend. I was going to 3 services. We were going to the homeless on Saturday night, praying in the back for a couple hours, and the whole thing, man. And I hear people talk about churches today about, oh, we need to get the parking ready. We need to do this. We need to have everything right so people come. Listen, the church that we had, FCF then, was on 3rd Street, kind of like an Azusa Street situation. And it was a crummy building. There was no foyer, no anything. You walked in the front door, you were in the big room. You waited for the second service on the street, no matter what the weather was. And it was tough, and you loved it. And you bragged about how tough it was getting in there. That's what revival is.
Yeah.
Man, it was tough to get into my church. How about yours? We had to wait for an hour to get in, we had this, we had that, and the Spirit of God, the gifts were in some respects really new. The healing time, which I'm not acquainted with, but the healing time, there was great use of the gifts. And I believe it was primarily, well, they read your mail, knew who you were, like Howard Carter, but it was mostly around healing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the service when the pastor had a word given out about something that didn't involve healing, and he like stumbled, and he didn't. It's a hard thing for him to give out, and he gave it out, and of course it was appropriate, and big things happened, and then it would kind of open the door for other things,
Right.
at least in our little part of the world, and that the word of wisdom, the future, word of knowledge, present and past, were for other things and too, and just amazing times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that what we know today about the gifts of the Spirit, it's been accumulated knowledge. The Bible is progressive revelation, and movements have progressive revelation as well. And so a lot of these things we've just kind of learned by experience about how the gifts work and how the authority of the believer works and so forth. And this back in the early days, we were still kind of going through the learning curve on a lot of these things.
Correct. Oh yeah.
Now, so now this was Faith Christian Fellowship, right?
Yes.
With Buddy Harrison.
Yes.
But there was also back then there was Sheridan Assembly.
Billy Joe Doherty.
Yeah, he was the youth minister there.
Yep.
Vet Bellis, I think, was the pastor.
Yeah.
And Vet Bellis Jr. was the worship leader who eventually became the music director at Rhema, and then he hired me to teach guitar there. And then there was Billy Joe left to start Victory Christian Center, which today is a church of, 15,000 people, something like that. Billy Joe and Sharon Doherty. And then Bob Yandian was an instructor at Rhema, and then he went and started Grace
Fellowship.
Right, Grace Fellowship. And so those were your three big churches, your big charismatic mega churches in Tulsa back then. But then a lot of smaller churches were kind of spawned off from those churches, and you could just about go anywhere on any given weeknight and find a church service somewhere where people were praying for the sick, casting out devils, and teaching faith.
Yep, you could. And Willie George, add that to the list.
Yeah, right. Now,
Gospel Bill,
yeah.
Church on the Move, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, Church on the Move. It's still going. His son is pastoring it today. Now, Willie George was. Did he start off there at FCF?
I actually think he was. He was youth. He was involved with the youth, and then went off on his own. He had his TV show, which was huge, Gospel Bill.
Right.
And then turned that into a church, and they've got like a machine there for youth. And they bus them in, and it's an amazing thing. But you're absolutely right. It was, and then we ended up going to a smaller church. I forget the name of it now. After Victory, we worked closely as ushers with Billy Joe and Sharon. Loved them, clean as a whistle. Sometimes we were the last four people to walk out of the Maybe Center. That's where they were holding the services then. Then they got their own place. And we would walk out through the makeup room where Oral would get his sit in a chair and get made up. The four of us would walk out and close the door. It's crazy times. And he would shake hands with everybody that wanted to coming down the escalators at the Maybe Center. Every one of them. And but yeah, God would move. Let me close this. I'm sorry. And it was wonderful times. We didn't realize what we had, and a lot of ministers had the tiger by the tail, and they didn't realize it.
And the movement seemed to wane over the years. I've talked about this a little bit, that a lot of the extremism and a lot of the error that surfaced, it seemed to be the result of the movement. The success of the movement kind of led to its demise because so many people were jumping in on the bandwagon that weren't mature enough, that weren't really walking with God. They were just opportunists. And then things kind of went off the rails there, I guess, around the 1990 or so. And so you and I talked a little bit about that before.
It's easier to teach the facts of a movement and the facts of God without conveying the heart and the internal. I can't even think of the words right now, but the context of a life that it takes to really deal with those facts of the Bible, if that makes sense. Kenneth Hagin would talk about something, and I think the critics would say, oh, he's this, but you don't understand, his heart was after God. He spent a lot of time with God. It didn't matter what the thing came or not in some sense, because the great hunger was God himself. And you take that kind of a heart and that kind of a context, a lot of these things work. You take that context out and the formulas come up and they don't work so much.
Right.
And then people work the formulas, they don't work, they get dissatisfied, they get disappointed and broken and hurt, and then leave the thing and say the stuff doesn't work. Well, it does work. But, was it, John 8:31, this is not a glancing blow. This is something you've got to stay in and seek him. And then eventually, the truth will set you free. And I think that, Hagin walked down, to my knowledge and to my belief, walked right down the middle, and not so much on some of the other people. They got it, some didn't get it. They got the periphery stuff, they got the formulas, and that doesn't cut it.
Right. Yeah, it's that. I think that was one of the biggest problems, is that people started looking at it as a formula, for like a self-help formula, rather than as a way of really appropriating the benefits of our covenant relationship with our God. Instead, it was like a Tony Robbins seminar or something like that. Well, you put these principles into practice, and you're going to have success. And there are biblical principles. I mean, not just for faith. There are biblical principles for a lot of things.
Right. That
most people don't have any problem saying that's a biblical principle. But when you start talking about biblical principles for believing and receiving, that's heresy. That's, metaphysical, or whatever they want to call it. It just scares people away sometimes. But I'm believing and praying and believing that we're going to have a reboot of the movement. I agree with you. Where the truths that were realized through the movement can become emphasized again within a body that is mature enough to maintain the movement responsibly, and not try to everybody build their own kingdom, and everybody try to out-revelate each other, because I saw a lot of that.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of people that felt like, well, I got to get a bigger revelation than this guy got, because look, all the people following him now.
Oh yeah. Listen, the Bible's big enough on its own without having to make it bigger and more extreme. It's to me, some of the chapters in there, John 14-17, read them over and over. I call it crazy talk, but it's real, but it's mind blowing. We're filled with the fullness of God. Where does that come from? That's Paul. You don't have to make it more powerful than it is, because it's already literally out of this world. And
right.
And there gets to be a competition, and you just got to stay out of that.
Hmm.
Used to have kind of, it sounds really silly now, but these prayer competitions where they would, try to outgrown you. That sounds gross. Who's going to get into the spirit and groan before you? And I remember going to one house, and the buddy I went with, as soon as we got in the door, he was like down on the floor, and I'm thinking, I looked down at him and, like, hey, does anybody have a Coke? With a Coke, and I'm not doing this. And but God is real, and those things are real,
Hmm.
but there is a spirit. There as the spirit wills, and there are flows, ebbs and tide. I think I believe with the things of the spirit and the flow, some of that is faith, lack thereof, and some of that is a flow, and
Right.
some things we just don't understand.
Right. We're all still learning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Rex, I appreciate your time. I've been trying to connect with you for the longest time. I know you're a busy guy because you got a career apart from your website and a home and a family and everything. But I'm glad we finally had a chance to connect on this, and I wanna have you back sometime to talk about some more things and maybe enter into some discussions, panel discussions, and things like that, because you've been around the charismatic movement a long time, and you've got the benefit of all those years. I mean, that's one nice thing about getting older, right? Is that you get a little experience.
Absolutely. Let me say just a couple quick things.
Okay.
I've read some of the critics, and I'd read a passage about what we believe. They say this is what they believe. And it's always put in a bad face and a bad light. And I read that and I go, I don't believe that, and I actually don't know anybody that believes that.
Right.
And I know there's a few people I don't follow. That's fine. But it was over and over again. And yes, prosperity was an aspect, but it wasn't central. The Gospels are full of believing and receiving things.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with things. That's the one interesting thing about Christianity. It's not afraid of things or the physical. Whatsoever things you desire when you pray. Seek first the kingdom of God and you'll receive all these things, the things that the Gentiles seek. Just go to seek the kingdom of God first. I don't have a problem. But that, to me, that's not even central. The central part of Word of Faith was actually in the title, Word and Faith. And I always get emotional thinking about that. Words and faith. How do they go together? How do you release faith with your words? How do you grow faith with your words? And not just speaking for any willy-nilly thing you desire, but things that are based on the promises of God.
Right.
And the things that God has spoken to you about. And speaking those out and growing that faith in your heart like a seed, Mark 4. And to me, that part is the central part. Maybe that's just my perspective, because that's the part that speaks to me. But word and faith, the word of faith that we preach, the Bible says. And I'll leave it with that, because to me, that is central to the gospel. It's central to every aspect of God's teaching to us. And I believe in some respects it has to be central to him, because that's why he made it central to us. So that's that. It's wonderful.
Great. That's a good word. Okay, well, guys, we're going to wrap it up here. Head on over to HopeFaithPrayercom. Check out the links that I'm leaving in the description. And we'll have Rex back another time to share some more of his stories and insights into what faith is and how it works. So thanks for joining us, Rex. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Rod.